Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
Hello, everyone. Here is a preliminary remark about the following self-produced re-recording of my presentation for the conference 100 Years Rudolf Steiner at Harvard Divinity School on Monday, December 15th, 2025. My presentation was the first in our panel discussion, and due to technical problems, you were unable to see the slides in full size and with good lighting. Worse still, the recording of the 5 presentations in our panel discussion failed. Therefore, the following version was created, but it contains the same text that I will read and the same slides. With one exception, you will see my last slide, which I skipped due to the late start and time constraints at Harvard. All right, let's imagine we are there now. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear art lovers, for a better understanding of my paper's viewpoints, allow me to introduce myself as an art historian who has published 4 books on Rudolf Steiner's aesthetics, art, and organic architecture. And at the same time as an artist who was truly inspired by a key impulse of Steiner's artistic practice, namely the reconnection of the visual arts with the artful design of our everyday environment, with the alchemy of the everyday, with eco-alchemy. My paper focuses on Steiner's students in the field of painting, sculpture, and organic studio furniture as an integral part of organic architecture. It refers to artists. Before I go into more detail on the first part of our panel's question about inspiration, let's look at the second part as it contributes to a better understanding of the first. With due respect for each individual artist, upon closer inspection, can we ask generalizing questions or give generalizing answers concerning Steiner's students? I don't think the question works in the plural, because you have to consider each individual artist and each individual work of art before making a judgment. The question of how leads to the question of who and what. I admit that anyone who studies the art history of the anthroposophical movement or simply visits the bookstore in Dornach and takes a look at the postcards there might perceive phenomena in both directions, inspired and seemingly constrained creativity. A catchword is real painting. But the seemingly constrained creativity of Steiner's followers is less a problem of Steiner's personal art practice than a general problem of art schools, which in the anthroposophical field were not founded by Steiner, but by some of his students like Geck, Wagner, Asenza, Collot-d'Herbois, Hausch-Capitz, and others. Well, another big but. Ladies and gentlemen, tell me, where is the Supreme Court of normative aesthetics to accuse an artist of being constrained? If this artist consciously and deliberately chooses to paint, sculpt, or build in the style of his revered master. Another reason for falling into the trap of an unreflective role as a judge can be seen in the task of searching spiritually concerned ways to a new style in art and architecture. A Gesamtkunstwerk style, a total work of art style, where every man-made object should be stylish, spiritually artful. Well, a separate paper would be needed to outline the spiritual style criteria that Rudolf Steiner communicated for the various visual arts. Every style implies a certain commonality, a coherence of style criteria, and thus stands in contrast to the prevailing paradigm in the modern art world, according to which artists should create always new, never seen before works of art for art's sake. The designation of this 20th century doctrine as so-called free art is misleading. In fact, it's an ideological disenfranchisement of art. The new style in art that Steiner initiated inspired artists who shared an awareness of his spiritual goals and renewed spiritual functions of art. Now, did Rudolf Steiner give his students aesthetic rules for their artistic work in order to develop a new style? Let me quote two clarifying basic sentences from his essay, Modern Criticism. Quote, "A work of art is all the more significant the more it contains within itself that which is unique, that which exists in only one human being. There can be no general laws of art, no general aesthetics. Every work of art demands its own aesthetics." End of quote. Steiner's aesthetic demand for unconstrained artistic freedom of the individual with the simultaneous creation of a common style reflects the same seemingly paradoxical demand as expressed in Steiner's philosophy of freedom, where the unrestricted ethical freedom of the individual goes hand in hand with the new common aesthetic. And because ethics encompasses all human actions, you can also subsume artistic practice under the following quote about ethics. I quote, "The human being is dependent on nothing but his own ideas, and he is responsible to no one but himself. I have already invalidated in my philosophy of freedom the cheap argument that the consequence of a moral world order in which everyone only obeys him or herself could only be general disorder and disharmony in human action." End of quote. So, in both cases, the quality of aesthetic artistic creation, as well as the quality of moral ethical action, is determined by the individual and his free will. Steiner's ethics and aesthetics are spiritually intertwined insofar as truth, beauty, and morality belong together. Understanding this radical individualistic aesthetic in relation to a new common style is a challenging task. Did Rudolf Steiner illustrate this task artistically? Two buildings, one style, exclamation mark or question mark. At least in theory, Rudolf Steiner did not establish any dogmatic rules for artistic creation. But what about in practice? Steiner's attitude towards his students may be illustrated by the following anecdote. In 1922, the advanced expressionist painter and student of anthroposophy, Walter Besteher, had a first conversation with Steiner, from whom he hoped to receive advice for his future artistic career. He brought two portfolios with him. The first contained artworks of him similar to those he had seen in Dornach. The second contained works he had created independently in Berlin. I quote from a report about this encounter. Rudolf Steiner silently put the first portfolio aside and, pointing to the second, said, "You must continue with this. In this way, you will make significant discoveries." End of quote. In 2015, together with the art historian David Roda, I curated two major museum exhibitions that provided an initial overview of early artists inspired by Steiner, accompanied by a catalog published in Czech, German, and English language versions. Here's the book. Inspired by Steiner, everyone was and is inspired in different ways. How strongly was an artist inspired or influenced by Steiner's aesthetics or personal art practice? How closely and for how long was an artist oriented towards Steiner? Is there iconographic evidence or indications, such as the artist's writings about his works, or membership in an anthroposophical artist group, or in the Anthroposophical Society? Many and more questions. Works by Walter Besteher can be seen on the photo below left. For those who are familiar with Steiner's color theory, please note Besteher's unique paintings of the four pictorial colors: white, black, peach blossom, and green. Very unique works of art were already on display in Munich in 1918 at the first exhibition of the first anthroposophical artist group called Aenigma. Here you see the cover and open pages of the catalogue. An artist group with an unusually high number of women artists, 8 out of 12, a sensational ratio at the time when women in most European countries were not permitted to study fine arts at a state university. The name of the group, Aenigma, in which this case means mystery, was given by Rudolf Steiner to point out, on the one hand, the relationship between art and the ancient mysteries, and on the other hand, the task of establishing new relationships to the spiritual world through art. If you are wondering what the images would look like if we had color illustrations, I can show you only 3 new photos. The whereabouts of all the other works depicted are unknown. Now here you can see the colored wood engraving by Maria Strakosch-Giesler, founding member of Aenigma. The photo shows her next to Wassily Kandinsky in his private painting school Phalanx, where she studied from 1902 to 1904. Anna Mayrichter's Grail triptych measured approximately 14 feet 9 inches by 8 feet 2 inches. That's about 4.5 meters by 2.5 meters. We know the colors from an old glass slide. The triptych was destroyed during the bombing of Hamburg. The original memorial stone by Cecil Pipers, whose pedestal was designed by Rudolf Steiner, can still be viewed at the main cemetery in Munich. It is a programmatic work of a new spiritual sepulchral art. More of the artists in the Aenigma artist group and many other works and many others worked together with Rudolf Steiner in and around the first Goetheanum to create total works of art, where all arts and crafts were united. Paintings and sculptures were not created for exhibitions, but for homes and living spaces. A new inner life that was expressed in a new artistic interior design to radiate an aura of love and healing power. The number of artists inspired by Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy grew rapidly and continued to do so after Steiner's death in 1925 worldwide. The top row shows interior designs by Warden Eschrich, and the bottom row shows designs by Fritz Westhoff for the threefold vegetarian restaurant in New York City from around 1930. On the further development of the anthroposophical current of a meditative modernism, I have conducted 2 research projects, one on anthroposophical artist groups in Germany and one on women artists of a meditative modernism. Here you can see the covers of 2 of my 2 unpublished research reports pictured above. The many folders in my archive with women artists on the left and male artists on the right. Here's some more, here's some less than 200 born either in the 19th century or in the first half of the 20th century, with a few exceptions, many, many thousands of works of art. The study on women artists in particular provided overwhelming results with regard to the questions, were there more Hilma af Klint's? Or to ask the question in other words for our panel in relation to quantitative research, how many artists were inspired by Steiner? How many women? How many men? And please bear in mind that there are still more artists to discover. My archaeological digging in Dornach a few years ago, I had to stop it. My research time was limited, and I wonder who will continue. So far, the quantitative aspect. But how can we answer the qualitative question of how Steiner's practice of the arts inspired the creativity of his students? Certainly only by viewing and experiencing each individual work, original work of art, preferably together with an understanding of the artist's intentions. Consequently, this topic calls for exhibition so that you can answer our panel's question for yourself with your own eyes. Therefore, we would need art historians and curators who would present this still unexplored art movement of meditative modernism with an exhibition in a major museum in North America. We've already had a few in Europe. And, good question, when will the first exhibition take place in the United States or Canada? Beside the curators, also an attentive art collectors might help. Collectors who are aware of the spiritual significance and the rising value of these works might invest in collections whose pieces could serve as museum exhibits. All museums acquire them directly, as is the case in Europe. There were two unprecedented auctions, one in Paris in September 2024 and the other just last September in New York, where artworks by Steiner early students were exhibited and sold. Let me conclude with one last slide, showing you 4 more pages from my research report, Women Artists of a Meditative Modernism. Although, due to our time constraint, we could not linger longer over the various slides or see more, I hope that all the works shown sufficiently demonstrated how Steiner's artistic practice inspired the creativity of his students. Quod erat demonstrandum. Thank you for your attention. Now, after these discussions, I wished to show another slide and say thanks. So the slide I skipped, well, this one has been shown, new publications and example of museum exhibition with studio furniture, organic studio furniture, anthroposophical studio furniture, and 2 publications about Franz Copain, a painter. Just 2025, these 2 publications about Franz Copain and the anthroposophische Prager Moderne by David Woda. Now the last slide I skipped, I show you. It's about another genre of anthroposophical art and still a forgotten current of art history. And now finally, I would like to thank the organizers and all those involved on site for initiating and carrying out this conference, especially for this panel gathering aesthetic papers. And in closing, allow me further to express my gratitude to the genius Loki of the land of the Massachusetts of Greater Boston, in memory of an influential publication that appeared in Boston in 1849 under the title Aesthetic Papers, and whose editor wished to assemble writers of different schools and views, quote, upon the high aesthetic ground. The authors, among them Emerson, Hawthorne, and Thoreau, believed that on the aesthetic ground all may meet to cultivate an harmonious intellectual, artistic, and moral life. I share this belief. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the Preston Fellows of Harvard College.